Financial institutions need to think holistically when it comes to building and maintaining an effective compliance program. Regulators will look to see that a risk-based approach is followed, where the bank should proactively have controls that mitigate their known risks. Products and services, geographical footprint, customer base, and transactional channels are specific areas that present their own set of risks. It's important to take a full inventory across all areas so that proper controls can be used to mitigate them. This will be used as the foundation for developing a risk assessment that will shape the entire compliance program. Another important component that needs to be considered by compliance is performing a model validation. This is intended to be a health check of your controls and whether they are effective in fulfilling their intended purpose. The advantage of performing a model validation is to identify any potential gaps early on and establish a plan to mitigate them. An unbiased opinion will also allow the harder questions to be asked, like whether the current approach is the best approach. From an AML model standpoint, the three main types of models within compliance are transaction monitoring, sanction screening, and customer risk rating. The approach to performing a model validation for each of these types of models is very similar, but with slightly different objectives. For transaction monitoring, you want to ensure the scenarios provide sufficient coverage of your AML risk typologies. This means making sure the model is set up properly with the right set of scenarios and parameter settings. For sanction screening, you want to make sure your system is configured to always have the latest lists with no holes in your screening. You want to make sure your system properly stops transactions containing names that are published on sanctioned and regulatory lists. For customer risk rating, you want to properly capture the riskiness of your customers based on what is captured as high risk in your risk assessment. These customers are the ones who may need more targeted monitoring, so your model should properly flag these customers as high risk. Regardless of the type of model, a model validation will cover the same 5 major pillars: procedures, policy, and controls review, soundness of design, data quality, implementation accuracy, and model performance evaluation. As mentioned earlier, this is intended to give you a health check of your AML models. It should be done independently from compliance, since the users of a model should not be the ones validating. Observations from the model validation deliver improvements to strengthen the controls and efficiency of the model. So let's review each pillar, starting with the procedures, policy, and controls review. The purpose of this is to assess the institution's current processes to determine the effectiveness and adequacy in achieving their objectives. Typically, this involves reviewing the standard operating procedures, AML OFAC risk assessments, roles and responsibilities, and model governance documentation. This review attempts to understand controls in the governance of the model and identify any potential gaps or opportunities to further improve. Even with a strong state-of-the-art model, poor governance of the model or usage of the model would lead to an ineffective program overall. The second pillar is conceptual soundness of design. The objective of evaluating a model's soundness of design is to ensure that the model is meeting its intended purpose. The rules, detection scenarios, and risk factors used for the AML model should provide the proper coverage across the risk profile. Note that this is where the risk assessment from earlier comes into play. The validation of the design soundness provides confidence that the model has been configured in alignment with the risk profiles. Next is data quality assessment. The purpose of a data quality or DQ assessment is self-explanatory. It's to perform an assessment of the data's quality. Financial institutions need to demonstrate that they have sufficient knowledge of their own data processes and that it accurately reflects real-life data. The AML model relies on accurate data as part of its rule logic, so having issues with any of the critical data elements which are used as part of that logic will impact the accuracy of the model's outputs. To test the quality of data, we typically perform 3 categories of tests. The first is standalone testing, which looks at the fields individually to assess the completeness, accuracy, and uniqueness of data. The second is back to front testing, which looks at the transformation logic between each system by following that the data mapping and lineage matches what is expected. The third is front to back testing, which looks at the reconciliation of the records, checking that the target system is not losing any records from the source system. The fourth pillar is model implementation accuracy. The objective of model implementation accuracy is to evaluate whether the model is actually producing the correct outputs based on the understanding of the scenario logic. The institution's understanding of the model should be completely independent of the model. You cannot solely rely on the actual settings and logic inside the model to confirm that it's working. So that's why it's important to have separate documentation outlining how the model is configured. This information would then be used to replicate the model to assess whether it was implemented properly per the specifications. Testing should be done to make sure there are no missing alerts. If there are missing alerts, then this indicates that suspicious activity might be going through unnoticed. If there are extra alerts, then this means the system is not efficient and is creating additional overhead for compliance to review. The last pillar is model performance. The efficiency of the system is assessed based on how frequently the model is reviewed and retuned, and by the actual outputs from the model. Patterns and transactional trends change over time, whether due to behavior or events. COVID-19 is an excellent example of one change right now. This may cause unexpected changes in volume and could cause a strain on resources when unprepared. A statistical approach should be used to determine whether the settings need to be adjusted based on the efficiency of historical alerts. When you have a high false positive rate, then it could mean you can probably adjust better. If you aren't getting a lot of alerts, then it could mean you are doing something wrong. To summarize, the topics covered here are essential to ensuring proper model risk management. Each of the 5 pillars of the model validation should provide the institution confidence or even opportunities to further strengthen controls within their AML program. We provide services that can help you prepare or perform a model validation or remediate findings as a result of a model validation.